The purpose of this video is to show you the format that I would like for you to use when turning in homework that I want to see in the formal business letter format. While there are a number of ways to do this out in the real world, by giving you the rules and the template that I would like to see, we'll both make sure that your work is consistent and organized, and that will be something that makes it easier for both of us. The first thing I want you to notice about the format is that it is a block format. This means there are no indented elements. There are no indented paragraphs. Everything aligns to the left margin of the page. You need to include spaces between paragraphs. That's kind of the rules of a block format. Now you might argue that the bullets are indented, which is true, and numbered items would be indented as well. But this is more a feature about readability of the document. So if you want to view them as exceptions to the rule, that's fine with me. The main thing I want you to remember is that all paragraphs and all sections of the document are to be left aligned with no indents. Before examining the document line by line, which we're going to do, I think we will start with a quick rundown of all the business letter elements. So let's go to the top of the page. The first item listed here is the return address. This is the address of the sender. If your homework scenarios give you this information, then please use it. For example, I might tell you that you are so-and-so and then you work at such and such company. That's the information you're going to use whenever you send your business letter out. If I don't give you this information, however, please use your own address, make one up, whatever you need to do, but put something in that place. You need to know that that's important and it needs to be there. When you send a letter out, you have got to give your contact information so that the person receiving the letter can contact you. I will be looking to make sure that you include this section in your papers. Now, after you leave a space, the next section you get to is a single line and shows the date that the letter is being written. And this section is followed by from 1 to 4 spaces. This is a detail that we'll talk about more later. The section after this is called the inside address, and it includes the name and address of the person and or the company that you're sending your business letter to. Another space is used here to separate this section from the one that follows, which is the salutation. One more space to separate the sections, and we finally get to the content of the letter. The first paragraph should be the introductory paragraph. The paragraph or the few paragraphs that follow should contain the main discussion of your business letter. And don't forget that each paragraph is followed by a space. The last paragraph in the letter should be a concluding paragraph. After another space, there is a brief closing. After the closing, you leave 4 blank lines. This is to give you the space to sign the document when it's complete. Since you will be submitting your documents electronically, you won't actually be required to put a signature on them. I need you, however, to know the importance of this space, and I need you to show it on your documents. So I will be looking for it. Those 4 spaces are definitely required. After the 4 spaces comes your typed name. The following line, which shows your position and or your company, is optional, and it kind of depends on the situation actually. That's pretty much the layout of the business letters that I'm expecting to see from each of you. Now we're going to go back and review this in greater detail. So let's go once more to the top of the page. In the top section, do you remember what we called it? The return address. You might notice that while my address is clearly visible, my name is not there. You'll find that when you get out into the business world and you begin receiving business letter, it is really sometimes very inconvenient to try to find the sender's name by looking through the top matter. The first and the best place to look for this information, even when you first open a document, is to go down to the bottom and look for the typed name. So the rule that is set up that a lot of people follow, and we're going to follow in this class, is this convention of leaving the sender's name off of the top of the letter. I just want to see your address, not your name. The next thing I want to point out that you may or may not know is that the official U.S. Postal Service format for United States addresses is as shown. On that last line, you will put the city, followed by a comma, then a space, then 2 capital letters. This is a 2-letter state designation. No periods, no punctuation, no capital T, small x. It's got to be capital T, capital X for Texas. Then another space or 2 spaces, and the zip code. You might not think that's really important, but the point here is I need you to get in the habit of formatting things properly and formally. And that is the true formal way to do city, state, and zip. And so I want you to learn that and use it. Next, when we get to the date line, believe it or not, there's a couple of things you should know here. First, the month needs to be spelled out completely. Next comes the 1 or 2-digit day, followed by a comma. Here's the trick on this. The day should never have additional letters like RD for January 3rd, or TH for March 11th, or ST for July 21st. It's kind of a language quirk in the English language, I guess. I don't know how else to explain it, that it's perfectly acceptable for us to read this date, if we were reading it out, as January 17th, but it is totally improper to spell it that way. The final note here is that you should always use the 4 numbers, the 4-year numbers. Don't ever abbreviate that. It needs to say 2017. Next comes that section that we call the inside address. And in this section, you are expected to place the name of the company and or the person you are addressing. Don't forget to use that proper city, state, and zip code formatting. In the salutation, the things I need you to remember are to use some formality here. Don't forget, this is a formal letter. So greetings, James, or hey, dude, is just not going to get it done for us. I want to see Dear Mr. Henderson, for example. The next potential problem with this area, though, has to do with assuming gender. My rule of thumb here is if you aren't sure about the person's gender, try to go with something that's gender neutral. Dear HR Manager might be a good way to address somebody, especially if you don't know their name. When addressing a teacher, you're pretty much in luck, as both doctor and professor are gender neutral. You'll see that what I used in mine is Dear Mr. or Ms. I often get letters addressed that way when people don't know whether I'm male or female. And I actually prefer that to getting a letter that says Dear Mr. Amaya. So be very careful, do the best you can, but watch out for assuming that when you read a name that it's a male or a female. It may or may not be. Finally, in a formal business letter, the salutation line ends with a colon, not a comma. I know, you might wonder about that, it's kind of quirky. It is the formal method. So I'm hoping to see from you, Dear Dr. Amaya colon, every time. Or Dear Ms. Smith colon. You need to be using this in the formal method. And the colon, which is the dot over the dot, is the proper one. Not a comma, not a semicolon. So be careful with that. Now, the formatting on the paragraphs is pretty straightforward. Just make sure you don't indent, that you do leave an extra line between paragraphs, and that you just know that you will almost always have 3 or more paragraphs. This is because you really need an introduction to your letter, you need a closing to your letter, and those two things are going to surround your discussion. When you get to the closing, you need to use something very simple and basic, and this one will be followed by a comma. Sincerely, best, regards. Those are all good choices. There's others, of course, that may be appropriate as long as you don't go too casual or too fancy or too wordy. Finally, don't forget to leave those 4 spaces between your closing and your typed name. This is that space that holds your signature. This is important. And don't forget that that last line with a position and/or company, use of that is optional. It's totally up to you. On my own letters, I only include them when I think it's important for the recipient to know that. Otherwise, I simply use the one line with my typed name.